Dirt and Dildos 5. SiKoV Sickness. So, I've been grieving my father's death from cancer that stepmom alerted us to just prior to my birthday in January this year, and manning a home relocation for safety the last couple months. It cuts deep to know Dad's gone, no matter the part he did or didn't play in my life. He never heard this decade-long struggle detailed, but I'm sure he'd be proud that I have the courage to share it. So here comes a tsunami of WTF. Beginning with the strange facts that Dad's B-Day is 9/10, a day off from Mr. SiKoV, who shares his B-Day with the 9/11 tragedy and mystery from nearly 2 decades ago. And that I had a vivid nightmare, complete with a migraine in the wee AM hours on 9/11/2001, prior to my FEMA position. Mr. SiKoV found my resume in 2006, posted publicly online, and asked me if I'd be interested in management and assist with building improvements through the local historic district, and many other tasks for a live show theater, recording studio, and lounge in Washington state. He was partial owner, and the second owner, later incarcerated. To what degree they committed any crimes together was always a mystery to me, and still largely is. The gorgeous and growing location was nearby the governing jurisdiction where technically I became a whistleblower years prior in 2004. A colorful clash of cultures and ever-changing scene of rough, poverty, rich, and rumble, very little parking to support the unique small businesses that peppered both sides of the road. It took me 2 buses and often over 2 hours to get to the theater from one side of town to the other across the highway. I incurred a huge pay cut with the position, but it was enchanting. An old favorite playground for many musical stars, including locally raised Jimi Hendrix. Renovated to innovative standards in many ways. Vaudeville shows, burlesque dance, foreign traveling performers, intimate CD release parties, rock star reunions with Heart's Roger Fisher, Wilson and friends, and more. Made it something I was willing to make sacrifice to experience. Who wouldn't? Anything for the music, I told myself, having taken acting, expression, and voice lessons years before, lead singer and lyricist of a band for a brief period, and hoped to find a new group. At first, it was enjoyable, and the owners kept to themselves, outside of sliding through once in a while to take whatever money remained in the accounts, or petty cash, for their personal investments and supposed repayment for private funding. Sometimes shorting the company on taxes and expenses, always putting that stress on me until things bounced back. I'll discuss the gritty details of being an on-call part-time bookkeeper accountant used as a scapegoat in a separate rant. It's too easy to screw the middle guy. We track and sustain your figures. We do not make your dollars or formulas. We must obey the owners, even if incorrect, cater to confidentiality laws, employees, vendors, and government as well, or lose our shorts. So there's plenty of room for misunderstanding, bribery, threat, sabotage, and scandal. Though many forget that owners are still ultimately responsible for all liabilities of the company, unless obvious major crimes above certain standard prosecutable amounts occur. You cannot force clients to give you information that they do not wish to. Thus, holes. Lines get blurry in owning and investment arenas. I come from the era of DOS, manual programming, and doing payroll, tax rates, and equations from A to Z, often by hand. No automatic, pre-formulated by Gov, blind, or unknown methods and factors like today. Unfortunately, I've also witnessed the E-world screwing peeps and biz too, but I digress. Once again, my professional career story and peeves for a future D&D. With time, I noticed that the lead bartender, family to second owner, Finamore, the end-of-love lady, was stealing alcohol and cash before closing each night. Easy escape to her apartment across the dark alley. There was no tracking of inventory. She explosively disciplined employees in front of customers, stole tips from other tenders and servers, allowed underage guests that she had sexual or artistic interest in, causing our security guard to quit. She claimed to be a talent manager, always on the hunt. She'd often try to persuade me into relations with her and others, comparing me to her ex-girlfriend, though I had no desire to play her games. The audio studio tech was grandfathered into the mix, managed his income independently, and had his niche handled regardless of beefs with SiKoV. Time required for cleaning, books, paperwork, artist, performer, producer, meetings, local and historic government requirements, online ads, and links became impossible to achieve alone, so I requested assist of some kind. One plump, flashy blowhard from California was hired at an insanely high rate, only for him to refuse my advice on city admission and dance floor taxes and forms, costing the company thousands in penalties, and was thus fired. The next guy was much older, artistically experienced, but way too quiet and sensitive for the crunchy neighborhood and rowdy patrons. Also, paid at least 2 times what I was, simply following me around and preventing ultimate progress. It seemed extremely odd that Mr. SiKoV refused to listen to me. His being an investor, rather than experienced business owner and manager, was making this venture nearly impossible. He opted to sell the business, and although I tried to hang in there with the new staff, it was the same headache, on top of the personal challenges I was facing with harassing, bullying stepmom, quickly aging maternal grandparents with dementia, and Alzheimer's getting family income care, as well as a personal long-standing mysterious infection bordering on blood poisoning. At least I'd had my day on stage as a burlesque dancer, met tons of novel artists, made over 1,000 music and performer contacts in the entertainment realm until someone hacked my account and deleted most. All right, figures again. I was so depressed that I didn't try to rebuild online, gave up on social outreach temporarily. As I later learned, Mr. SiKoV had studied psychology and was a hypnotherapist. Married to a woman who never spoke, rumored to be a rescued homeless rape victim, but was admin in big pharma, elderly and disabled care. He soon got back in touch, claiming that his former partner left him with a few disheveled properties on trade up north, an office near my high school small town, and somehow convinced me that I should assist him in his personal, messy computerized system and real estate profile to streamline in anticipation of his retirement. There were over 40 properties, some empty or with extremely troubled tenants on government aid, others with established management companies, more yet, stuffed to the ceiling with boxes of antiques, collectibles, pests, and trash, handwritten everything, secret files for certain helpers, no templates and no centralized databases, a skeletal book system that he'd already convoluted and refused to let me spend ample time on completely fixing to any standard. I vowed to do what I could, agreed to assist on a very part-time basis as a contractor, independent so that I could have a flexible schedule, less obligation, and more pay, and so that I could maintain more control with this guy. Hopefully learn a little more about real estate trade and procedures. I had a few additional clients and was a regular taxi for my partner too, so only saw what SiKoV wanted. At some point, my sister even opted to live in one of his buildings, left without paying full rent, and SiKoV forced me to bill my mother for it, which they further hated on me for. Strange that he would pay an attorney to evict individuals who owed under $1,000 in rent but had secret files for businesses who appeared to owe over $50,000 sometimes, one being an undertaker and funeral home. Could there have been favors or trade in planned property scandal or crimes on the poor? Expensive, overcomplicated insurance policies? Too many bank accounts with transfers and cash transactions, irregular scheduling, jerking me around, cutting me off in discussion, denying my experiences and recommendations for organization and safety, refusing my attempts at inventory tracking was beyond my quality control at 1 to 3 brief visits per month to catch up with only his notes to match to statements for reconcile, incomplete and sketchy at best. I began seeing evidence that maybe he was not helping his tenants, as much as manipulating and experimenting on them. We would often take an MJ break. He'd offer his stash openly and always. I likewise, sharing mine, always. So I truly thought I could trust him. for the most part, even though I knew that he had many other drugs on site, legal and illegal, that he knew well I never wanted to touch. The following main events, rapid fire, as my grandparents passed, are the slew of poison that I still can't believe I lived to talk about. But it figures, since I've missed death by a magical margin, at least a dozen times for doing less than daring things. First thing, tenant next door to our office during closed hours begins shouting awful commands at what sounds like a small whimpering child. Then I hear lots of fumbling, banging around, and suddenly a blood-curdling, soul-splitting cry from a youth. Then an adult voice saying, "Shut up and go clean yourself up." I panicked and banged on the wall, told him to please stop, whatever he was doing, and he shouted back that I should mind my own business, B-word. I called the cops, and they shrugged it off, said the business was closed, that they took notes. Mr. SiKoV seemed eerily not concerned once informed, even though this was his tenant and property. Yes, red flag. Number 2, I initiated cancel of my signer ability on his bank accounts because he would command me to create, print, and sign checks ahead of time for him to pay at his convenience. Once he collected rents and deposited enough funds or transferred to proper accounts to cover, he'd fall short or mess up and try to blame the bookkeeper, though I was not in total control of any of the follow-through. 3, he had many cash-paid workers, lots from the mission, homeless, so easily controlled. In fact, the property manager was one of them, so my suggestions went nowhere, as usual. No sense in upgrading buildings that he aimed to demolish or sell eventually, and local government as well as developers were salivating over the prime property locale, pushing for takeover or negotiation consistently, though I was never privy to all the details. 4, a tenant came into the office one day when I happened to be there, wanting to dispute his rental balance. So I explained that SiKoV gives me notes and receipts. He would have to dial direct. I showed him the computerized statement with copies of the payment receipts. He lunged at me, motioned his wife in for support, and violently tried to steal the file, cornering me in the office. I called the local cops 3 times, while this guy was loitering and screaming in my face and threatening me if I didn't change his account information on the spot before SiKoV returned. Our property manager showed up before the cops and diffused the situation, thankfully. Private rescue again. Mr. SiKoV was also not worried about this incident when I reported it. 5, a few consecutive years in the same fall month, SiKoV visited China for supposedly psychological conventions, scheduled alongside the local fire chief's wife. So authorities were definitely privy to his absence. Unsolved arson became free demolition 2 times. The day prior to the first fire, I made a scheduled visit to the office, but received an unexpected visit from the property manager and a tenant, Mike, a disabled U.S. veteran who walked with a cane. Both in a frenzy, they explained that the fire extinguishers had disappeared from their regular spots in the building. New ones were ordered, but that didn't solve anything in the interim. Mike's mandated drug prescription by VA authorities was supposedly recently massively increased without reason. He was shaking, blacking out, having a hard time staying conscious, and was certain that he heard strangers out behind his apartment, back of the building, spraying some kind of harsh chemical that he could smell and was further making him ill and frightened. VA authorities and local cops, when called, would not respond, did nothing, and later refused to acknowledge reports. We were all at a loss and opted to keep each other posted. That night, a fire broke out at the back of Mike's apartment, precisely where he reported odd activity. Everybody escaped without harm, except for him, and some material loss. The firefighters on duty were told to stand down and waited over a half hour to arrive from just blocks away, then entered and immediately conducted professional demolition tactics. No apparent investigation. Written off as an accident, since Mike was a cigarette smoker. Then also being accused of taking street drugs instead of admitting that his prescription may have been a scandal by government forces. Myself and the property manager were caught amidst the trauma and drama, the complicated aftermath, while Mr. SiKoV laughed, undoubtedly unreachable and conveniently out of the country for the entire thing. Being that I have U.S. veteran family members, was FEMA myself, and nightmare tormented by 9/11, my heart and psychological wellness suffered severely. No one would listen to me, and everyone wanted to blame someone. Same thing happened in the second fire, building just a couple blocks away. SiKoV in China again, this time also disappeared extinguishers, a battered and drugged mystery woman, not even a tenant, set up and perished, water damage to the entire building, equivalent to demolition, even though the fire was restricted to one small corner. Insurance companies wrote me off as unimportant, again, just flooded me with standard paperwork and copying of contracts. I wrote a letter of details known and concerned to local government, but received no response, as I expected. SiKoV was, as I was finally seeing clearly, serial killer silent, stone cold, and deliberately provoking in my weak moments. 6. 2012 election, myself and partner ultimately chose to campaign and rally for third-party libertarians after witnessing some very real Republican voting fraud in the pre-election processes. SiKoV, a proud and vested Democrat, socialist, and fascist, voiced hating this fact repeatedly and often bullied us like most peers during that insane election period. 7. I also noticed SiKoV begin to change data in the book system without alerting me, receiving checks with income that he would not explain, that seemed like percentages on dealings came from perhaps incognito LLC names or shark partners, like former bartender, Finamore. Possibly his even having sold embellished or twisted life stories of some kind, from his tenants, employees, patients, and or victims, to producers for Netflix, Hulu, and other exploits for entertainment. So I began worrying about parallels to my own life that were sprouting up publicly, though I was no longer socially sharing. If a person knows this is happening to them, it is enough to drive them completely insane, especially if the story holds lies that will equal character assassination to anyone who recognizes other similarities and makes lazy associations or accusations without direct questions. SiKoV and his kind will even go so far as to pay cash to strangers to locate you, your friends, coworkers, and family, send in plan attacks to keep you traumatized and appear to be unstable, ill, or paranoid, when you are actually being maliciously terrorized and emotionally flattened, a very real victim. Ancient gaslighting for the win. Same time frame, an ex-military baby man who ran into a car with his bike and broke both his wrists began working with my guy, moved in next door and began preying on our sympathies and spying on us regularly, then convinced us to let him become a roommate, proceeded to provoke me politically and then film me in my own home while my cousin was dying of cancer. He also stole our valuables, broke our stuff, and his own phone, computer, and auto, put screws behind our auto tire for my birthday, flooded our front yard after a solo bonfire, increasing our water bill by hundreds of dollars, quit his only job, expecting a settlement overnight, putting more burden of the rent on myself and my partner, then cooked mysterious chemical drugs on our flat-top stove while taking MJ and checks from my underwear drawer, and called the cops on us, only to have himself escorted away with his childish, flippant father after I explained the above to authorities. What's up, Chamberlain? You epic boob. 8. Lastly, by 2015, I was making and vocalizing efforts to discontinue work for Mr. SiKoV, boldly telling him that I did not agree with any of his methods and that I needed to move on. He was increasingly upset by this, literally tried to command me to stay. But soon I was only visiting one time per month, other clients of mine almost a full-time schedule by themselves. A regrettable and fateful visit to his office in the summer of 2016, again campaigning for libertarians with an obvious bumper sticker this time around, was the last time I actually saw or interacted at all with the beast. For the record, I would describe him as short, 5'4" to 5'6", long, gray and white curly hair, large nose, beady dark eyes, puffy beard, small build with slight beer belly. I remember him driving a black Ford rape and escape van, and believe that he generally works and lives in Washington. The murder attempt day, I delivered a deposit, the full amount, for a new temporary tenant in dire need, but noticed upon arrival that all things looked way off from the last time that I had been there anyway. And SiKoV sent me a text that he'd be late and that he needed me to wait. Within a half hour, my vision went blurry, my hips and legs were giving out from underneath me, and panic set in. I realized that I had most likely been drugged or poisoned, but had nothing to eat or drink nor smoke and met with no one that morning. SiKoV showed up an hour later, went straight to the bathroom without a word for what felt like 15 minutes or more. Came out and immediately showed me pictures on his phone of Kurt Cobain, a memorial, and then a house, and said, "This is where he commits suicide," then smiled like the Reaper. I may have passed out briefly, suspect rape and possible videotape, but eventually remember only pulling myself up by a chair and telling him that I felt really awful and needed to leave quickly so that I could make it home, since I had no one to call for help. He followed me out and asked me to return the next week because he was going to be out of the country again. I said, "No way. Not after this. I think I might never return." Stumbled slowly down the stairs and to my car, barely made it home, freaked my guy out entirely, passed out for a few more hours, woke up with bruises everywhere, bleeding from everywhere, with bladder loss, vomiting, and having diarrhea on and off for months. I'd break into tears in public whenever someone said something that questioned my trauma and my behavior. I had no idea who to turn to or who would believe me, and the country was buzzing on the election, so probably thought that I was just being a political attention seeker. Natural methods such as ACV, probiotics, honey, coconut, indica MJ, turmeric, and simple foods and fluids were all that made me feel better, but physical recovery took over a year. Emotional recovery is still in progress, if I'm being honest. Myself and my partner were targeted by mail theft, harassment at local stores, a hit and run on our car, and many other nearly disabling incidents thereafter for at least a couple years, trying all the while to save up to move out of the state and away from what felt and often still feels like consistent routine mocking, torment, and lies instead of interviews and empathy. I can't begin to explain how much of my life and sunshine it feels like SiKoV stole from me. It haunts me at every turn and prevents me from being the zealous, funny, and once open person that I enjoyed being most. We've had to alienate ourselves simply to protect ourselves, others, our own investments, and just to find a shred of peace and sanity. All right, so cliche, all that being said, I've done everything I can humanly think of to expose and fight SiKoV and those who work with him to capitalize and feed on the novelties and misfortunes of kind and or poor people. I do not claim to know what makes him tick. These types are very tight-lipped about their own lives and logic outside of their generalities and half-truths. But he loses his temper with individuals often. Many weaknesses he still has, be sure. His profile is large, but fluid funds are usually tight, so I know he's not invincible. He even has at least 2 children who live as far away as possible from him in this country, probably for good reason. No doubt, scum pigs study the psychology realm to find out why they suck so much and learn how to manipulate others for their benefit. You can only combat their takedowns by understanding how their strategies work, what they need to succeed, and knowing what tactics will permanently help you escape their cancerous clutches. Gov is not your friend in these situations because they don't ask enough questions, nor do they care enough about the details, your health, and sanity. They will quickly label you with some disorder and prescribe you expensive pills and unhelpful sterile counsel to validate their power only. Hone and trust your intuition. Mine warned me, but I was already too weakened by a broken foot in a kitchen accident, persuaded by others, SiKoV beat down hypno-psych efforts that I let our need for funds guide the way. I guess this is just one more reason I prefer not to do anything just for monetary incentive. The leaders will count on that being your downfall. So, in closing for now, know that there are homegrown perpetrators, aka terrorists, in every town and watching you in your hood and online, whether Gov finds you interesting, threatening, or not. You don't have to be a bad, evil person or be doing anything wrong to find yourself a victim of someone who does not agree with you, who stands to lose something, even illusion, if you are correct. Possibly an unexplainable casualty in the risks of exposing your passion or your knowledge. I'm considering a conceal and carry as soon as possible, since us freedom lovers are required to be our own heroes frequently. And just in case you think I'm making this all up, I've invited a living, breathing man who has known me over 10 years to confirm that everything I've disclosed is as accurate as we both can recall. Insert a random disclaimer here if you must. Oh, hey babe.
Yes, babe, this is Vince, here to confirm that everything that she said is completely true. As a matter of fact, I've been involved in the recording process and editing process for this entire run of the series. We've discussed every detail before we even publish any of these things to make sure that every last thing is completely foolproof so that you all can actually hear what's happening to us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you and I love you. That's our post-sex motto. You can have that too, America. Remember and question 9/11, fools and tools. And crappy B-Day to SiKoV, one of many U.S. psychos.